a song for you.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskett, here with my first returning guest of the show, Mark Roback. Mark, how are you?
Great, Scott. How you doing?
I'm doing great. You, of course, are one half of the hosting team of the 70s Weekly Podcast with Mark and Pete. Please tell me I said it right this time.
It's 70s Weekly Countdown
God
with
damn
Mark
it.
and Pete. Yeah.
I swear to God, by the time you come on the third time, I'll have it down.
That's all right, because I've said it on our show. I've pronounced it the way you just did. And of course, Pete always corrects me.
Right. Yeah, Pete's good. He should take his Diebold label maker and send you the label of the title of the show that you could just put right on your monitor.
Yeah, that would be helpful, or like stick it to the back of my hand or something like that. Yeah.
Now, as we're recording this, I don't think your first episode has aired yet, has it? No, not yet. It's coming up soon, but has not aired yet, and you're already back. I've actually recorded all of the first 3 seasons and the first episode of season 4 because I got so excited doing this show that I was recording a show a day and forgot that I only release 4 a week. So I was getting way ahead of schedule.
Oh, well.
And I'm like, just calm down, relax, enjoy this. Because I noticed with the Uriah Heep show, the whole thing, like some of the albums, they just went by so fast. And I'm like, but I already recorded that and now it's done.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing though. If you can get them in the can, you never know what can happen. We were discussing a little bit before we started recording with me.
Yes, between
issues.
Computer issues, and I've got a film soundtrack coming up, and I'm releasing a couple of my older soundtracks as well. So I'm getting those all prepped, and I mean I do have a lot going on. So it is nice to be a little bit ahead of schedule. What I notice though is that sometimes I will forget that dwindles down. And in my head, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've got like 3 weeks to go. And I'm like, oh, I only have next week recorded.
Yeah.
That thins out at some point.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
We're here to talk about Lelania. I keep thinking Lelania. I am all over the place today, Mark. I'm so sorry. We're here to talk about The Painter, which in an earlier episode, which you haven't heard yet, there is a song called Hey Bop a Rebop, which was sort of a precursor to The Painter. You could tell that it was kind of a jam that would eventually turn into that song. And that was released with the Book of Taliesin 2000 remaster. And now we're on the actual song, The Painter. What made you pick this one?
Well, I have to say, it's between this and Hush, but I almost give a nod to this one as being my favorite Mark I Deep Purple song.
Really?
I just, and I didn't really know about it probably until, I'll say like maybe 10 years ago or something, when I was kind of getting back into Deep Purple. Mm-hmm. And I heard it and I'm just like, this is great. This is really, really great. And I don't know if I'll give away if you had any facts about the song, but this is one of only 3 songs that credit the whole Mark I band in terms of writing.
That's right, and it's interesting too because it seems like everybody just kind of like got into little groups and would write songs, but you're right, there's very little that the entire band is credited to. I find this an interesting song because it's got such great energy to it that it feels like a precursor to In Rock. Like they're starting to head to the more energetic stuff and kind of gearing up to be a heavier band. Yeah,
and I think it's got some different breaks to it that you don't expect, and so it's imaginative. But in the last episode, I talked about how I really love this period of music from, I'll say, 68 to 71, 72, where it just evolved incredibly fast. And you're just hearing all these bands, it kind of starts from like the British bands, adopting the, and reimagining the old blues standards and the blues stuff and turning them into rock songs. But then it's just like, yeah, it kind of takes off and it evolves into its own thing. So
It
I
really
I
does.
agree. I see you hear future Deep Purple in these early recordings of theirs for sure.
And
Yeah.
yet this is on the same album with April.
Right.
Which is a complete departure, or exactly the opposite until you get to that third movement. But every song on this album, I just really, really enjoy, and this is such a great era for Deep Purple. It's weird to think about this being the same band that would go on to write songs like Perfect Strangers or Highway Star or Smoke in the Water. But when you think about it, it's such a natural evolving process, and you change a couple of members, you get the experience of going on tour, and on top of that, you're watching how music is evolving into different different styles. It's growing. Hard rock is becoming a thing with bands like Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep. This album is actually pre Uriah Heep, but you see that landscape changing and you see the potential and you want to grow with it, but you don't have anything as a precursor to say, oh, here's how it's done. You kind of find your own way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. There was really an evolution going on
Mm-hmm.
in that time. It was almost like something opened up where it's like, well, you let's just try try anything,
Yeah.
try something new and see how it floats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I think it's sometime in late February or early March. I'm covering a 3 CD box set from Cherry Red Records on the Haskincast podcast that goes from 1965, I think, to 1973, covering the music of the Motor City. And I've
Yeah.
recorded that already, had a lot of fun with that and digging into those songs. And yeah, that era, you know what? It was, there's stuff that preceded it, but it feels like a real experimental time, a time where you could just write about anything. If you had something that was catchy and the song just felt good, it wasn't that it was so political or had to get a message across. It just was a time where music felt good to listen.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And I think that you think back to that time too, people's exposure to music was, kind of limited,
Mhm.
particularly like young people. Um, so to hear these things, it would be opening up like a whole new world to the listener too.
Right.
Um, this particular track, uh, if you had heard Hush and you liked that, I think you would like this track as well, but
Mhm.
also see it as like, yeah, almost a bit of a progression from that too.
Well, I'm trying to think what would have been the exposure, because I mean, obviously you had radio, which was going to be very select songs from each band, but how much TV exposure was there? I mean, there couldn't have been that much back then.
No, and from what I know about early Deep Purple too, they really weren't taking off much in England. It
Mhm.
was it was when they toured in the US that they you know were getting attention and airplay, and then the UK noticed that.
Right.
It's like, hey, these guys are back here. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, if you happen to hear a song or see a performance somehow, you then would probably go buy the album or see if
Mhm.
any of your friends had the album,
I think
to
your
listen
your
to.
best bet was probably getting on the BBC more than anything else.
Right, right.
Yeah, and they did do a couple of BBC events. There are on the 2000 remasters of the first three albums. There's some bonus tracks with some BBC performances that some of them are actually pretty decent recordings for the time.
Hmm.
They're a little rough sounding, but you can get the gist of the song. But the great thing is that you can see even at that time they had a pretty good energy on stage. And if you think about, Mandrake Root came from Shades of Deep Purple, their first album, and that would become, even in Mark One, was a pretty big live performance song where they got kind of crazy. But it
Yeah,
wasn't until really Mark Two where their stage show just went insane.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the liner notes for The Painter, are very, very brief. It just says this track was recorded live, no double tracking. So we get the deep meaning of this song based on that 2 sentence. That's literally all they give us. Not a whole lot to go on, but it is cool to know, and I think it shows in the song because there's a real energy to it that we're going to hear, and I think it kind of shows that they were very much together when they recorded this.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to me, a guy who goes out and does a lot of research on songs could not much find much of anything on this song really as well.
Were you able to find anything beyond the wealth of information I just provided?
Pretty much no.
Wow. Okay.
And for that matter, I couldn't even find like any amateur interpretations of the lyrics or whatever.
Wow.
So we'll have to do our own right here, I guess.
Yeah, it does feel like it's kind of abstract, but I kind of think that I'm just not good at finding meaning in lyrics either. So I tend to think a lot of things are abstract when somebody actually has a point.
Agreed. Yes, a lot of stuff flies over my head too. But the other thing is for me, as I've gotten older, I pay much more attention to lyrics than I used to. And there's songs that I've been listening to for 30 years, and it's all of a sudden I caught a lyric, and I'm like, hey, that lyric is
Interesting.
pretty innovative, or like I didn't catch that, and that gives the song a little bit different meaning to me.
Well, it's interesting. By the time I get to trying to listen to a Zappa song, I don't even bother trying to figure out what he's talking. I can't figure him out musically or lyrically, and probably never will. Amazing though, absolutely amazing artist. But I was on a live stream last night of the podcast, and the podcast will rock, which covers Van Halen, and they've done their entire catalog. They're now going into solo albums from different members, and they were doing a song from Wolfgang Van Halen last night and trying to figure out, is this about his dad? Is this about David Lee Roth? And I'm like, I don't know that a song necessarily has to be about any particular person or experience, because these songs are written by people who are creative. So isn't it possible that sometimes they just use their imagination and write a song?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've done enough research on songs in the 70s where it's like, the public thinks this, and then, it was about this. And then the actual songwriter is like, no, I saw something and it just, thought, oh yeah, or I heard some line someone else said and I built a song around it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I had a friend who wrote the rhythm to a progressive song based on the number of milks that were on a shelf at the grocery store.
Yeah, there you go.
And he wrote the whole pattern on that. But it's interesting because these are creative people, but we also have to think these guys are still really young. I mean, they're in their early 20s and they really haven't experienced a whole lot of life yet. So it's like, what perspective are you even writing from? Because you're a touring musician. You've probably seen more of the world than I have, but you haven't really experienced a whole lot yet. So it's got to mostly be coming from your imagination.
Yeah. And that really amazes me at times when, some of these artists are so young, and they write and sounds, like somebody that's got, the wisdom of an elder like myself or something,
Right.
Like the Allman Brothers, they they were just like kids basically when they came out with stuff, and it's Greg Allman sounded like a 60-year-old guy when he was
well,
singing Whipping Post.
And that's a perfect example, because that makes you, when you listen to that, you feel experience in history in that vocal. Like he has lived this. And I often use the example of Reba McEntire, who's not a songwriter, but makes you feel every note, every word, like she's lived a hard life.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure she's had her moments, but certainly she has not lived the experiences of a lot of her songs. And for her to convey that and make me feel like she has been through it, that's what you want in a singer.
Yeah. And then you get like CCR. The guys are from, California, and they're singing about the bayou, and it sounds like, oh yeah, they grew up on the bayou for sure. It's like,
Exactly. The ability to take an idea and come across as a believable historic experience is a real talent. Because you can,
Yeah.
if you've seen Mr. Holland's Opus, speaking of music movies, you can play the notes on the page or you can play what the notes mean. And if a
Mm.
singer can convey what the words mean and not just what they say, then you got a hit,
Yeah. Yeah.
or at least a good chance. And I think Whipping Post is a great example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the first time I heard it, I remember thinking that I'm picturing this like, haggard old guy that's been through the ringer. It's like
Yeah,
that's the early 20s. These guys haven't, you know,
yeah.
done anything in their life yet.
Yet it's one of the most soulful vocal deliveries I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, let's check out The Painter. So this would be
Mhm.
1969. And I mean, Deep Purple, Ian Pace, I think, is 19 or 20 at this point. Richie's probably 21 or 22. I think John was a year older. Uh, really young guys, still a lot of experience under their belt. They've been a big hit in America. They've toured with Cream for a couple of shows until they got kicked off. And I mean, they've been through some stuff already, but man, it's so hard to fathom. Like I think about getting out of high school and working as a dishwasher at Perkins Restaurant, and these guys have already toured America by that point.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's absolutely insane. Well, let's check out The Painter by Deep Purple.
Right.
What song starts out with a 36-second guitar solo?
Yeah, and not only that, it is jarring when it comes in. Like, if you drop the needle on your album, it was like you might drop your drink or something when
Yes, and
this comes in.
I have to look because I think doesn't this come in right from Fault Line?
I believe so.
Yeah, it comes right in from Fault Line. So it's if you're listening to the album or some of the CD versions, depending on whether they put that 1 second buffer in there or not, it should flow right in from Fault Line. So it is a little bit jarring listening to the song on its own because it's meant to have a flow that you don't get that way. But
Yeah.
it comes in with everybody on fire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and you're getting the organ swells, and it's just, yeah, everything is like all of a sudden in your ears all at once. There's no
Mhm.
ramping up and bringing things in one at a time.
Right.
It's there and it's blistering. I
Mhm.
mean, the guitar is great. You can see how kind of Richie matured, or at least the production of his sound too
Mhm.
matured from the first album, because it sounds really great too.
Yeah. Yeah, it
It's it
does. Let me ask you this because I think the drum fills, especially that last one we heard that's going right into the vocal part, it's really explosive and energetic. And I feel there's a definitely an element of Ian Pace being young, but I think it's not a childish fill. I think it really works with the song. I don't think it's over the top, even though it's kind of grandiose.
um yeah, yeah, it's not something that's like, oh, you hear that and it's like, oh yeah, that's not in with the rest of the thing. No, it fits in perfectly. Yeah, there's nothing. Um, you know, it sounds like he's having fun doing it. I'll
Yeah.
tell you that much. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. For
yeah,
sure. And even John Lord with just the little organ stabs in the background, that really just takes the song to another level because without that, it's a nice groove, but it doesn't spark.
yeah, yeah. Boy, I'll tell you too. What happened to the organ? It's an instrument in rock music that I love, and I think it should always be there as much as guitar is.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Deep Purple, and particularly the Mark One, where it seems like there's a lot of the songs are organ centric,
Hmm.
or at least the organ is definitely front and center with with the guitar. It's just moving the song along and adding little things to it.
I agree. And I get that most riff rock is written on guitar. It's the perfect instrument for it. And organ is typically used to support the guitar. But what Deep Purple had, especially in Mark One, and a few songs here and there going forward, but especially in Mark One, was the ability to show both as featured instruments. And I love the trade-off that they have. I love the rhythm organ style that John created to complement Ritchie. But you're right. When we got into the 80s and synthesizers became all the rage, kind of drew back the organ showing up because now keyboardists wanted to play with fun toys.
Yeah.
And then you get into, the late 80s going into early 90s and you look at bands like Poison and the organ was gone. You didn't
Yep.
even really have keyboard players. You might have had somebody in the studio, but you weren't touring with anybody. So they weren't really that much of a thought when it came to writing, which, yeah, you're right. That's a real loss in music.
Yeah, I can remember, I think in that time period, and then, listening to whatever was popular at the time. And then, going back and listening to some older stuff from this period and maybe just a little later. And I'm like, yeah, what happened to that organ? It was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And, thinking about Uriah Heep was a very organ centric band for the first, 10 years or so, because Ken Hensley was the primary songwriter. And so a lot of those are really organ featuring songs with guitar, not so much taking a backseat, but kind of being there more in support at times. But then when Mick Box came forward with a solo, it was a guitar solo. But he
Yeah.
was really playing for the song and not like, hey, I'm the guitar player, I need to stand out here. It was a very different dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. And all the, you look at the prog bands too,
Hmm.
through that time.
Well, Emerson,
Whether
Lake and
it's,
Palmer. I mean,
oh,
you
for
wouldn't
sure,
have you
yeah.
wouldn't have that band without. I
Yeah.
mean, most of the time, Greg Lake was playing bass anyway.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know,
then, yeah.
and then
Yes.
the
And
opposite would be Led Zeppelin, I guess, because they didn't have a keyboard player at all. But you heard some keyboard here and there, but very much a guitar band.
yeah. Yeah. And
So,
then, yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting to think about. And
Mhm.
I wonder if it could ever come back.
I would love to see that. I really
Yeah.
would. I know a lot of bands that are, cover bands and stuff have the keyboard player because they need one. But it seems like because there's a demand for that, it seems like that would be there in the songwriting too. Like, yeah, this sounds good, but we need another layer. We need some more depth. We need some more color, something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know what it adds specifically, but maybe it's bombastic, I think.
Hmm.
It's you hear that and it's like it's impossible to kind of ignore an organ because it's got the sustain on it.
Mhm.
And maybe that's why it died too, because I don't know, maybe it didn't stand out or something if then you had a keyboard solo. But I think I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I could listen to the organ all day.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I mean we're listening to one of the best keyboard players in history right now.
Right.
But I think I mean it adds thickness to the song, it adds some color, and personally I just get sick of the guitar sound after a while. Like I can only listen to so much Metallica because even though their songs are different, the sound is the same and there's just only so much constant distorted guitar I can listen to without something else breaking that up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to the song because I think we're going to hear some Rod Evans here.
Come care of my life. Oh, painter, come care of my life. Take away the misery, take away the strife.
The only drawback for me to this song, and this is fairly common of this era of music, is just the repetition vocally. We get a lot of just, I'm going to say this line twice and then I'll say the third line. And I mean, that is fairly common of this era, though.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting too. I was listening to the song earlier just to get prepped, so to speak. And you know how if you're making a movie and you want to set it in a certain time, you would pick a song. And for like the 60s, I always think of, something like Incense and Peppermints or something.
Oh, yeah.
That would be in there. It's like, I think if I was making a movie, I might put this one on to represent the time.
Oh, yeah.
You
That could work. I mean, if it was like the Korean War, you'd be playing Time of the Season, or, there's like so many shows that song has been used on to, apparently we're in the Korean War now, or. Oh,
and then the big cliche is the CCR, Fortunate Son is
right.
Everything about the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, did you ever see, I don't know if you watch Family Guy at all, but
I've seen it. I've seen the Star Wars ones. I haven't really seen
Star
too many
Wars
of the
ones
show,
are great.
Yeah.
But there's one where the Quagmire guy, he was supposed to be a Vietnam vet, and they ask him, what was it like to be in Vietnam? And he starts going, oh, it was horrible. And he has flashbacks, and he's like, everywhere I went, Fortunate Son was playing by the CCR.
Oh man, call it out.
Yeah. But yeah, circling back, it's like I could picture making a movie and like, I don't know, people walk into a club and this is on the jukebox or something. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, okay, that sounds like, 1969.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, if you put it in the right scene, this kind of energy would be great in a film too. As somebody who's worked in film and, scored a couple of films here and there, I can say if I had the chance to license this for the right scene, I'd be all over it.
Yeah. But I do agree with you that the repetition of the I guess the melody the same way in each stanza, if you'd call it, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's something that's something that evolved. I think this is something you're seeing from the Beatles and from the Motown stuff, and then in the late 60s into the early 70s, then it starts to change, and it's like, no, we're going to do verses differently. To add more color.
It was almost kind of cut and paste style wise back then, because this is how the verse goes. It doesn't matter what the words are. We'll sing them the same way as we did the last verse. And then this is how the chorus goes. This is how a repeating bridge is exactly like it was. So it's like they wrote tiles and then put the tiles together to make the song, which is fine. I mean, you had to start somewhere. And so I get that progression, but I'm just glad we got out of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Until the 80s, and then we brought it back.
Yeah.
Because it was all programmed, right? So, I mean, you had the whole British New Wave invasion. Okay, I wrote the verse, I wrote the chorus. Now I'm going to repeat the verse twice. We'll do two choruses, then I'll write a bridge, and then I'll copy and paste all that over into the programming. It was easy to do.
Yeah.
But what I love, though, is the music going on behind Rod. I mean, they didn't... Yes, Richie's not soloing, but they have not dropped the energy. They didn't back off. A lot of times you'll get the band will drop down to support the vocal and let the vocal cut through, but we're still getting a lot of energy from the band and the vocals cutting through.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I could picture this being, without the vocals, being just a fantastic instrumental on its own.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be good. Well, let's see what they do next, because I'm just loving this energy.
Just give me words to say.
Good God.
It's fantastic, and it's you hear. I think, as you were saying, you hear in rock and Machine Head, you
Mhm.
know, coming from this. This is,
Yeah.
this is Richie doing his thing, and it's great.
I wonder how strong his grip was if you shook his hand, because that guy has got to have wrists of steel to be playing like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible, and it just there's a lot of there's so much phrasing
Mhm.
in that whole solo. It just keeps moving along. It's
Yeah.
there's not like repeated phrasing from the beginning or anything. It's like he's just moving on and he's doing more and more things as he goes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the song really evolves. And I love that part where the organ just all of a sudden comes in with that one chord. Just all of a sudden, it's like, hey, I'm here too. You can keep playing, but I
Yep.
just, wanted to remind you I'm here and my
Yeah.
solo's coming up.
Yeah, it was almost like like, hey, whoa, whoa, okay, we that was awesome, but let me let me cut in here
Right.
for a
Yeah.
minute.
But one thing that I love about Richie's playing is that I don't get bored with it. He could just go on, and I'm like, he didn't do that before. That's new and interesting. That still fits the song. I don't feel like I'm being removed from it at all. Um, Later on in life, when he just kind of is soloing through an entire song, I sometimes feel like he's gotten away from the song itself. But here, he is right along with the song, and I don't feel any disconnect at all.
Yeah, yeah, and you can tell it's amazing how tight the band is at
Yeah.
this point. I mean, you've got the one thing I always said about Deep Purple is it's like you put that, all great musicians in a band, and if they can gel, that's it.
Yeah.
I think the problem is sometimes they can't gel, or there's
Yeah.
whatever, and to keep that going is difficult. But man, you can tell if I heard this in 1969, I'd be like, yeah, these guys are these guys are going places.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean but that's kind of why I don't buy fantasy sports, right? Because you can put all the statistically best players together, but that doesn't mean they're going to play together. And you'll notice there's really not much fantasy rock band.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, you can definitely see where the band was headed. And except for the departure of their next album, the Concerto, I mean, this song could have fit on In Rock very well, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think uh, if I have to say that the sound got a little heavier, if
Mhm.
you will, and the production is different, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, but but on the other hand, I think this. So is this a remastered version, or is this
This is the 2000 remaster. Yeah.
okay? Yeah, but it sounds great. I
Mhm.
mean, with headphones on, it's like it seems to be mixed well,
Yeah.
and it really you know whatever production they did, which they obviously did a lot more than on the first album with this, I assume. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, come Book of Taliesin, they were given more time because I think the record company Tetragrammaton was like, yeah, we need to sound better than that.
yeah,
And give you guys a chance to flesh out some songs a little bit instead of doing so many covers and just rushing through things to get it done. And I still say it's a great album. I love Shades of Deep Purple, and it's amazing what they were able to pull off under that kind of pressure, especially because they didn't know each other yet.
yeah.
You know,
It's not bad at all for them being just literally thrown together.
Yeah, but
and
but here now they've done some tours, they've done a lot of shows together. They're working. This is their third album, so they've had time to work together as friends, as musicians, as writers, and so they're really settling in by this point. And the only sad thing is, I've always wondered what would one more album have been like, further development from the band, watching the progression from one to two to three. It would have been so interesting to see what one more album would have progressed to with this lineup.
yeah, I agree. And Nick Semper is a good bass player
Yeah,
in my opinion. I never listened to this Mark One stuff and say, "Oh, that's kind of pedantic or whatever." It's like, no,
right.
he's right up there with the rest of the band.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, the stuff that he did would really shape what they would go on to do for decades because the whole Mandrake Root bass line is what kind of exploded for them live and allowed them to play a 20-minute song and just kind of go wherever. And he was the one that laid the foundation for that. Plus, his sound is just so hard edged. And
Mm.
it really cuts through and adds a depth that bands were not getting at this point in time.
Yeah, yeah. It's no, you're right. I've often thought that it's like, yeah, had they done another album or two,
Mhm.
and you know, you you probably would have got some different songs out of there, but I bet they would have been pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, with the intent of going a little harder edge, but also looking at what was going on in the music scene come 1970, I think they would have upped their game more. But
Yeah.
I do question how Rod would have handled that because I think he would have had to change lyrically a little bit from love songs to something a little more expanded lyrically. But
Yeah.
I think he had the edge to do it vocally, but I don't know. It just, I guess it just kind of depends on how he would have written with the band and how it would have felt. But I definitely see Nick would have been able to continue with them for sure with his bass sound and his writability. And he's a very creative bass player.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting with Rod too, because having not, you know, done much after, if anything. I don't know if he did any songwriting or what, but it would have been interesting to see what if he would have progressed or not.
Right.
Um, because obviously the band progressed, but as I said, in the beginning, listening to the song, it's like you can you can see the pedigree like moving to where they went in the early
Yeah.
70s. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, Richie had so much experience coming in, working with Joe Meek and doing experimental stuff, and then all those studio sessions. John had a lot of experience. Plus, he was classically trained. So, you got a lot coming into the band. And then Ian Pace with his swing background playing with his dad's band. I mean, it's just a recipe for awesomeness if you can get the people together to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, let's see where the song goes next. Because I think we got some John Lord solo coming up, which,
yeah.
you can never complain about that. Is that not just badass or what?
What's so great about that is he's so melodic,
Mhm.
through that solo. It's not like it's like crazy fast or anything. It's actually he's taking his time with these melodies or
Yeah.
something. But then, at the end with those swells, it's like, um, you know, yeah, yeah, this could get really hard.
Yeah.
And that's like an awesome, like, kind of way to end the solo and move into the next section of the song. Yeah, this is why I really love this song, and I think it's one of my favorite Mark ones, because the beginning, you got like the guitar solo, and then that middle guitar solo leads into this organ thing, and then you hit those swells, and then we come back to the vocals. It's a well, it as you said, like the vocals, that's formulaic, but the rest of the song is not, and it's a well put together song
Yeah.
for for the time it was a longer song, actually, if you were going to release this as a single, but it's not that long a song in terms of like an album track,
Right.
really, for sure. So
Yeah, it comes in at 3:52 on this version, and I've noticed that the last, 4 or 5 seconds are usually silent. So about, 3:47, 3:48. But what I love about this is that the solos are so contrasting. Richie is just on fire the whole time. He's like, and another thing, and another thing. Oh, and I
yeah,
forgot to tell you about this. And John Lord comes in and he kind of builds more of a foundation with a little bit of repeating and then builds on that and then starts something else and builds on that. And it's just a whole different approach. Yet the song doesn't seem to slow down, even though the solo from John is more patient and more building. It doesn't feel like the song is like, oh, okay, I'm coming out of it now. It's like, even though he's doing something completely different with a completely different feel, I'm still moving forward with the background.
yeah, agreed. I'm not sure, but as I was listening to the solo this time, it's like I hear some lazy in this.
Oh,
I swear, like maybe I don't even think he reused stuff necessarily, but there's something stylistically in some of the organ parts of lazy that I think I hear here.
okay. You know what? I never thought about that, but that's very possible. Thinking too about the fact that this was done in one take, I'm assuming that includes the solos, that they weren't overdubbed. I didn't hear any rhythm guitar behind Richie's solo, and I didn't hear any rhythm organ behind John's solo. So I think this was literally, they just walked up, picked up their instruments, recorded this, and went, yeah, that's good.
Which is incredible.
It
I
is.
mean, yeah,
But if you try hard, and I remember Ian Pace has mentioned this in interviews, like if you don't get a song in the first 3 takes, just stop and come back to it another day. Because you're going to start going, what was that one thing I did that I really liked? And I want to put that in here. How did I go into that? Or how did I come out of it? And you're going to start overworking yourself. I think some of the best recordings are things that just happen spontaneously, like this. Like this is just where we were in the moment and it came out great.
yeah. And I also think, your bands that are really great live bands, I think that they it's sometimes hard to capture that in the studio.
Yeah.
And these things where it's like, oh yeah, we'll just record a take like this with no overdubbing. I think you capture that energy. Um, that it's like, yeah, we're just gonna go out there and rip the roof off the place and then see how it sounds.
Right. Exactly. Well, I mean, and that's why they wanted to record Machine Head on a stage, because they wanted to get that live feel and do it like a performance. And it makes sense because they're so on fire live that that's what their album should reflect as well.
Yeah.
I shouldn't hear Donovan and then go out and hear Speed King live and go, oh, that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
But this is amazing energy that they've captured in this recording. And when I was reading the liner notes and said this song definitely does feel live, it really does feel live. The energy is there. They are so tight and together on this performance. It doesn't feel like there's a way you could overdub and capture anything remotely close to this.
Yeah.
I mean, the only overdubs obviously would be the backing vocals because, as good as Rod Evans is, he can't sing multiple parts at the same time.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, this is just such a killer track. Well, let's go back. We got about 30 seconds. Let's finish this one off.
Alrighty.
Let me sing a song. Oh, sing on.
Okay, I just got to stop it right there, right after I said let's finish it off. I love that little drum part right there because he's kind of off time with the accents, but it doesn't impede on the progress of the song. Sometimes you can try things like that and they really throw you out as a listener. Like that was weird. Now I've got to get back in the groove again. But he completely threw the feel off, but yet I don't feel like I'm out of the song.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think to your point, I didn't even really notice it.
Oh.
For some reason, I was focusing on the bass in that in that section and the kind of little melody he had going on there that I didn't notice earlier in the song. But yeah.
Well, does it seem to you since the organ solo that this has gotten heavier? Like this verse is heavier than the rest of the song?
I think so. And maybe that's why I was like noticing the bass that it was I don't know.
I almost
heavier
feel
or
like,
quicker or
yeah. It sounds like maybe they turned Nick up where he's playing harder. It almost feels like, okay, Richie got a solo, John got a solo. I need to stand out in this song. And I'm not saying that from an egocentric point of view, but it seems like he's really driving it now. Whereas before he was playing a great melodic bass line, but it's like now he's pushing in there. You know, so yeah, interesting though.
Let me sing a song. You don't have to worry, 'cause singer, you can sing along.
God, the amount of reverb on Rod's voice when he's isolated for a second, it's unbelievable how reverbed he is because you do not hear that during the parts with music behind him.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
Yeah,
they might have kicked it up a little for that, but you know, it's not uncommon for reverb to get buried with all the other instruments. And whenever I've heard isolated tracks, like we've heard on the Deep Purple podcast, some of the isolated tracks, and it's like, you wouldn't know it sounded like that because of the way it blends.
Yeah. Those isolated tracks episodes I loved because, you know, it's just, you're like, I never noticed that in the song at all. And then the next time you listen to the song, it's like, oh yeah, now I hear it. There's, you know, the bass or the drums. There's something going on back there that was like awesome that I didn't hear.
Right.
You know, subconsciously, of course, it was coming in. Yeah.
Even songs we know really well, like when they did Smoke on the Water, and you could hear all the little nuances that Ian Pace was playing, and you're like, he's really doing all that? It sounds so straightforward.
Yeah. I think my only, again, I love this song. I think the way they ended it, I would have ended it like rather almost abruptly, like they started it. You know, I kind of thought after the last lyric, and then there was that there's like the drum fill that's in there. I think I almost would have ended it abruptly, like right there, like with like all one note. They kind of let it drag on, almost like a little. I always call it like the blues ending, where it's like, no, we gotta ease you out of this or something.
I almost feel like they knew that this was going to be a song they were going to perform. So they just said, well, why don't we just end it like we would on stage? And, like we're going to do it anyway, so we might as well just do it in the recording. But I remember too, John Lord saying, and I wouldn't have faded this out, and you're not suggesting that, but he had said, it's almost like cheating when you fade a song out. Like if you played it live, you'd have to end it. So you should be able to end it in the studio.
Yeah, that's a good point. And God, in the 70s, it seemed like so many songs faded out.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it was like annoying because it was like sometimes it's like, holy crap, that guitar riff is like the best thing I've heard for the whole song, and it's fading out.
Yeah, there were some songs I covered from Uriah Heep where the initial guitar solo was at the fade out, and I'm like, I want to know what happened, and it's gone.
Yeah,
I'm like, I want to follow the song into the fade and go with it where that party goes. And that was what was nice about Roger Glover doing those 25th anniversary that turned into 40th anniversary remasters, because he played some of those songs out until they stopped, and you got to hear what they did and how they actually ended it in the recording versus the fade out. And I'm like, oh, you could have left 5 more seconds of that in. That would have been great. There's a killer little thing Richie did, or John put in the stab or whatever that was really cool. It's a tough thing because
Yeah.
those are sometimes hard decisions that have to be made, and a lot of times it's the producer that makes them and not even the band.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's like, the song's got to end somewhere and you got to fit the tracks on the album
Mhm.
and et cetera. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
and back then, so you're thinking 1969, so you're really mostly limited to the length of a vinyl LP and how long your songs can be. So a lot of those decisions are made based on, okay, we've got X amount of minutes, which was what, 22 minutes, I think, per side or something like that.
mhm.
And we have a song like Child in Time, which is more than half of the side. What can we do here? You want your songs to flow and have a certain arrangement from song to song and make the album flow. But your real nemesis is the amount of time allotted per album side.
Yeah, yeah. If you think about that too, it's like, again, the way you consume music back then. So you throw on the album and it's like you're not, particularly like the first time you listen to the album, you're not, okay, I'm gonna pick up the needle and move to this next, three tracks in because I want to hear something different. It's like, no, it's gonna go start to finish. And so as a producer, you've got to think about that. And yeah, how each song leads into the next. And um
Well,
yeah, it's something as the new mediums have come out, it's like that's something that's sort of lost, I guess.
well, yeah, and the other thing is there's no album break anymore. I mean, if you're thinking about listening to a vinyl record when side A was done, unless you had one of them real fancy stereos, you had to get up, flip it over. You didn't
Yeah.
have continuous experience like you do now. And I
Yeah.
think there's something to be said for that break because it gives your ears a minute or two to kind of refresh a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas I find now, if I'm listening to an album straight through, by the time I get maybe three-quarters of the way through, I'm suffering from a little bit of audio fatigue.
Yeah. Or even with an album, it might be, oh, I'll listen to side one today and I'll listen to
Mhm.
side two tomorrow because you have
Right.
that break anyway. Yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't. So a side actually had to have its own kind of progression or
Mhm.
uh yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I hadn't really thought about that. And I do wonder with generations that grew up with, say, CDs or even cassettes, because cassettes would auto flip. You would just have typically a long pause at the end of one side.
Yeah.
But thinking about kids that grow up on the CD or the streaming generations, I kind of wonder how they're affected by noise fatigue and things like that because they might not even listen to an album. They might just flip from this song to that song to that song and make playlists instead of experiencing an album at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then I was just thinking too, I'm old enough to remember, 8-track tapes and how with some bands the track was too long, so it would, it
Yep.
would have to go on to the next track. And
Mhm.
that was a sad medium to have to listen to music on sometimes.
Do you have it now though, like when you listen to some of those songs where you're waiting for the track to stop because it's so programmed into you from
Oh
listening to that
yeah.
way? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have that too. I had In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson on 8-track, and there's that one spot where I know the track was going to shift. I had whatever the album was from Yes that had Worm on it, and there was like right in the middle of the song when it's right at the heightened part of it shifts the track, and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
out of it now.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So painful, so
Yeah.
painful. I mean, they were a neat idea, and they paved the way for cassettes. So I appreciate what they tried to do with those, but it just didn't work.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, yeah, to get a portable medium that you could, put in a car,
Hmm.
yeah, that's what they had to do. So
Yeah.
it worked and it didn't. It worked till something better came along, basically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, Edison didn't just create the light bulb. He had a lot of other things he tried that didn't work. Fortunately, they weren't mass produced for the public. but
Yeah.
but yeah, this is such a great song, and I can see why you picked it because this song is just pure fire from the time it starts to the time it stops. There is no lull in the energy. no breaking point. Even the only time the music really stops is for John Lord to do those stabs, but you don't notice. It's not like you come out of the song and have to go back into it. I mean, you're just in it the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. I just think from start to finish, it's really, really well put together. There's some of these tracks, from the Mark One albums that like are so disjointed that it's like, well, I wouldn't even have called them the same song, literally. But this one is like, no, it comes in on fire and goes out on fire, and there's all kinds of stuff to love in the middle. I
Yeah.
just this one, uh, yeah, as I said, and again, Hush was a cover. I love Hush, and that's also a fantastically put together song. But this one being, one that the all the members get writing credit on. Yeah, I think it's my favorite Mark One song.
Yeah, and it's a great one. And I think that's the thing is like the first album was thrown together. It's somewhat disjointed from song to song, although I think there's some great stuff on it. Book of Taliesin was like they're trying to find their identity. And I feel like by this album, they found one. It wouldn't be one that they would stay with, but I feel like this incarnation of the band became a coherent unit. And
Yeah.
that's why I think I would have liked to have seen what they would have progressed on to with one more album. But it's like, well, if they did that, then we wouldn't have In Rock and we wouldn't have Fireball. It's such a you could go down that rabbit hole, but the history is the history. But it would have been interesting only because I feel like now they found an identity. They've got some good stuff that they've written together. What would another tour and another album have brought them? Where would they have headed musically? Or would they be like, you know what, we're just, we've toured together. This is kind of done. It just wouldn't have worked. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, yeah. You read a lot or you hear interviews with different people, and you never really know what's going on with a band too, and what, from a personality standpoint and an ego standpoint, what's gelling and what isn't, and even then, yeah, a direction,
Right.
and who, that cliche I always used to crack up at the behind the music, because those things all seem to have the same arc. And one of the arcs is always that, somebody wants more artistic, input or license or control of the band, and that,
Right.
the rest of the members can't take it. So who knows? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that I did hear, and I think this was in a John Lord interview, was that Rod was kind of disconnecting from the band a little bit, that he had dreams of being an actor. He had gotten married. He wasn't giving what he was. So I could see there being a need for a change. And that's why I'm like, well, maybe the next album wouldn't have happened anyway, or maybe it wouldn't have gone as well because not everybody was 100% invested. The Nick Simper thing, I think, is kind of a big question mark for me, because I've heard John say that that Rod couldn't go where they wanted to and Nicky didn't want to. But I've also heard him say he didn't have the right chops to do it. So was it that he didn't want to or that he couldn't? And I've heard Nick agree to neither. He never said he didn't want to, and certainly what we've heard him go on to do in Warhorse and Nick Simper's Fandango, he had the chops. There's no doubt about his ability to play. So I don't know. I mean, was it that Roger Glover just wowed them so much when they recorded Hallelujah that they're like, all right, this guy's better? Because Ian Pace was not the original drummer of Deep Purple either. And when Rod Evans came to audition, they snuck that guy out. He went to go get cigarettes, and they brought Ian Pace in the back door to audition Rod and brought Ian with him. And next thing you know, that guy's out of a job because Ian Pace was better. So was that it? I mean, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. This is human interaction, right? Too. You'd probably get a different story from every person in the band.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure the perception and the memory are two different things. Like whatever it was 50 years ago and the way it's recalled today are two very different stories. You
Yeah,
know.
that always kind of cracks me up, particularly, with a band like Deep Purple that, where a lot of these guys have been together, maybe in and out a little bit, but in a band for this long, it's like asking me about, you know, well, why were, you friends with this guy in high school for a few years and then you had a falling out. What happened? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I remember being friends with him. Don't remember why.
I remember being friends. I remember being mad, but everything in between just
Yeah.
gone. Yeah. Well, even the story of Smoke on the Water, when we met with Roger in August, he said we don't even remember what happened. I mean, I remember hearing stories about he woke up in the middle of the night and heard the word "smoke on the water," and I remember he was in the bar and he wrote it down on a napkin, and like there's all these stories about how even that came together and nobody knows. And at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter because what we have are results, and
Yeah.
those are what matter. But it would be curious only because I can understand why there would have been a disconnection with Rod if that really was the perception that he was disconnecting from the band. But I guess I've always been curious about Nick Simper because talent wise, I don't think he would have been off his space on In Rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
But
don't
there
know.
is, there is that gelling of musicians, and I
Oh,
guess if and talking about when you're actually playing, and it's like, well, if one guy feels like, nah, he just, he can't take my cue that I, want him to do this or whatever. Um, because you hear about, other bands where it's like, no, I couldn't possibly do it without this guy.
yeah.
Y- y- you know, it's like I wouldn't be me without him.
Right. Right. Well,
So
I mean, that's certainly true, especially if you have like a songwriting partnership. Like you look at Gillan and Glover, who had started writing songs together and they became kind of a partnership. And then you see the benefit of that in Deep Purple. If Ian had come without Roger and it would have been Nick Simper, you'd have a different band.
right, exactly. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, though, I'm grateful for the progression that we got because there
Hmm.
is so much good music that comes out of these guys. And not just that, but all the bands they inspired and who learned from them. I mean, there's so many bands I've heard say, "Oh, I was inspired by Deep Purple," or I mean, you look at Metallica and even the Foo Fighters. Dave Grohl says that Ian Pace was a big inspiration for him. So, I mean, there's so much that goes well beyond the music of what these guys did for the world of music.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Mark, thank you so much for joining me for this
Yeah.
one. I
Uh,
look forward to doing this again.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, before we go, just
Yeah.
because we talked about it in the beginning, do you want to take a stab at interpreting the lyrics of this one,
Oh,
or?
yeah. I think it's about knowing that keyboards would eventually die from music and we needed them back. I think it's the yearning for something different. I'm feeling kind of bored and complacent in life, and I need somebody to make life exciting and vibrant again.
That's actually a good interpretation. That's I think more, ethereal than I
Hmm.
have. I have a little bit more literal, but also
Okay.
kind of along the line. I think it's someone looking to art to inspire their life or
Hmm.
make their life better. So color, painter, color up my life and take away the misery and strife.
Hmm.
And then the writer make a play that's basically, it's gay here, but happy.
Right.
Um, but then at the last line, I can't really, to me, it doesn't fit because then it's singer let me sing a song. So it's like, well, now I'm going to do it myself. I'm not
Right.
inspired by
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't feel like he's gotten out of the doldrums, so he's ready to sing. It just feels like this is another way of getting out of them, but not that he's already there, and
yeah,
willing to take that power back. But I think the reason I went in this direction was because he's asking for something new to be created for him to get excited by, as opposed
right.
to, okay, I can go to an art museum and feel better because I'm seeing beautiful paintings, or I can put on a record by a band I like and get out of this bluesy feel I'm feeling, only because he's asking for something new to be created as opposed to just drawing on what's already there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, because It's in the present tense.
But
Yeah,
what you're
paint me
saying
something
is,
new.
but what you're saying is right. He's still drawing on the art to make him feel better out of, whatever it is that he's going through. And I kind of like that part's mysterious. Like, we don't need to know why he's bummed. We
Exactly.
just need to get that he is. We understand where he's coming from, and we're good with that.
Yeah, and again, I talking about, of the time these type of lyrics are. It's almost like there's also like a lot of social upheaval going on,
Yeah.
and you could see where people are like, well, God, I just need need something to help me along here. Yeah.
Well, and that is one thing that I think certainly during COVID, people really learned to appreciate things that I don't think they thought about that much. And I saw so many memes that said things like, how would you have gotten through COVID if music didn't exist? Or how would you have gotten through COVID if you couldn't watch movies? And I'm like, that's a really good point. But we use those tools every day. I think we just don't think about them because they're there and we just go, I want to hear this, and we put it on and don't really take the time to step back and appreciate that it's there for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one thing I try to do in my life in general is just like really take a step back and appreciate what you have access to.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, in terms of art, music, movies, paintings, it's all at your fingertips.
Right. Well, and
nowadays.
I used to do a gratitude journal where every day I would pick 5 things and just kind of really think deeply about them. And what I mean by that is like, okay, so I could take this coffee cup, for example, right? And I could say, somebody had to think of this shape. Somebody had to figure out what materials to use. Somebody had to design this logo. Somebody had to create the company that designed this logo. And when you really take it back to somebody had to create the material to be able to make this cup, and you think about any just ordinary daily object so deeply, how can you not appreciate being able to drink out of that cup on a whole different level?
Oh, absolutely. And I think to that point, I always say this to people. It's like, we should be proud of ourselves as human beings. We started out with rocks and sticks.
Yeah, that's right.
Look at what we got now.
That's right. Of course, there's all that debate about, we're just a genetic experiment and we've been helped along the way, which, I guess if that's true, we'll find out someday. But just looking at our progression over time from cavemen to us being able to do this podcast, for you and I to be in 2 different states, being able to look at each other and do this live and play a music clip. And it's pretty amazing when you really break it down.
Yeah, it really is. So
yeah, definitely grateful for where we exist. Mark, tell us where we can find your podcast.
Yeah, so well, we're on the X and Blue Sky. So after our last episode, we started on Blue Sky. So at both of those, we're at 70s Weekly, and you can find the 70s Weekly Countdown with Mark and Pete on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you find other fine podcasts like Scott's. Has anyone ever complimented you that you're so humble about your Uriah Heep podcast?
Oh no, but thank you. Am I?
I don't. I'm trying to make a joke about the Dickens character.
Oh,
Uriah Heep
right,
about being so humble.
Right. Gotcha.
But you are.
No, well, thank you.
Yeah.
No one has. In fact, I think they've just become so well known as a band that it's kind of a disconnect now from the character, that they're really kind of their own thing and not connected. Because I mean, obviously that is where they got the name from, but they started out as Spice before Ken Hensley joined the band. And then when he joined the band, they changed the name to Uriah Heep and got a little bit heavier, but they did one album as Spice and then kind of changed everything there. But it's amazing the amount of people that have listened to that show. And I still get people finding it for the first time and checking it out and getting into Uriah Heep and getting some good listens for this podcast, which I'm really excited about. So I can't complain. It's just good to know that the stuff that we're putting out there, people are enjoying and even just taking the time to give it a chance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But I would definitely recommend any of Scott's
Well,
podcasts because
thank you.
he's
And I would
very talented.
recommend your show. The only thing that I don't like about your show is that I have to wait a whole month for the next episode, but they're very long episodes, so it gives me a lot to enjoy. And I typically enjoy them when I have to go. Well, really, the only place I walk now is the post office or Walmart. So you guys are great company, and there's a huge nostalgia factor because you guys are talking about music from the '70s, which is what I grew up on, and I I have associated memories with a lot of the songs, and then you'll surprise me with one I've never heard before. And I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know how that got past me, but Casey Kasem talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of Pete and I have said we've discovered a lot of lost gems where it's like I don't remember the song, I never heard it, but God, I love it.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah.
Yeah, there's
So,
a lot, but as long as there's people like us to keep talking about them, those songs will always be, I mean, they're there, but those songs will always at least get some level of attention. So thank you guys for doing what you do. Your show is a lot of work. I know that, but it's really enjoyable to listen to. So thank you guys very much and keep at it.
all right. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So this has been once again great being on, and yeah, look forward to being on again, and perhaps we'll have you on our show too at some point.
I would love that. And I can't wait till you come back on for the next episode. In the meantime, thank you guys for listening to the show. We'll see you on the next episode. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode and thanks for listening.